Okay, for today's assignment, we are going to shift our focus just a slight bit before you actually go and do your data analysis. So at this point, we wrote our hypothesis, you should have done your procedure, and your table should be fully filled out for this first column. So that's all you need to do. I'm going to take that so that we can get the class averages. But we are going to do that together on Friday. So what I want you to do instead is we're going to go and look at this background information and see if there's some things we can look up that are going to help us when we write the conclusion. So this background information, there's a couple of problems with it, one that should stick out to us and one that I just know because I've done background research on this before. So the major issue with this background information here is they give you all of this information about what your pulse is, what your heart rate tells you, kind of why it's stronger in some people than others, but they don't give you any sources. So the problem here is if this could have been written by anybody. Anybody can say anything in the background information. If they don't have sources, it could all be wrong. And we'd all be functioning under a false premise. So that's something we want to avoid. And especially for this one, I may have mentioned this for your class. I may not have. But there's one part in here, this first part about what your pulse is. It's a little simplistic, like saying it brings food and oxygen. It's not literally bringing food, but it's bringing nutrients. That we're going to overlook for now. I wouldn't want you to write that way, but this was just to give a very vague overview, general overview of your pulse. The one sentence that I do have an issue with is this one here. So in this one, this sentence, they go away from just explaining what they're talking about, trying to define and explain what your pulse does, to making a assumption or a conclusion about why people have different heart rates. So they say here that people with stronger hearts, such as athletes, will have a lower pulse rate during exercise than a non-athlete because their heart muscle is in better condition. So that's a very general, kind of bold assumption, but it's a little problematic because it sounds okay. It's not like they said something crazy like, I'm trying to think of something crazy about heart rates, like people who drink soda have much lower heart rates than people who don't drink soda, which you might feel like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. This part, like the premise that athletes have a lower pulse rate during exercise, seems fair, and that they say it's because they're in better condition. It's not wrong. I'm not going to say it's a completely wrong statement, but with the background information that you learned from the Edpuzzle video that you did, you already saw that there's a lot of reasons that people have different heart rates. It could be their athleticism, that they've trained a lot, stress levels, if you're dehydrated or not, your genetics. So some people are just naturally, their baseline heart rate is lower than others, and it has nothing to do with their health. It could be what you ate. It could be just your hormone levels. All sorts of things get into that. And so it's a very simplistic thing to say that part. And then the second part, now I feel like I'm ranting about this, but the second part is to say it's in better condition. This is something that we'll shift into, and we'll look at the cardiovascular system as we are learning about organisms. But it's much more complex than just saying one person has a better heart than others, or it's a stronger heart, or it's working better. So one part is that the heart muscles will get a little bit stronger, but the other part of it is actually due to the muscles and a lot of things that happen within your body when you're working out. You can get not necessarily more veins and arteries, like more blood vessels, but they can expand, they can flow more blood through. Your muscles like start to work more efficiently, so they don't actually have to use as much oxygen or nutrients to do the same job. So what we want to do here, because they put out just such a simplistic view on this thing about why people have different pulse rates or heart rates, what I want you to do is we're going to try and find a good source, a credible source that is going to help us make a better conclusion than they gave the background information. So what we're going to do, and I'll show you how to start this, because finding a credible source can be difficult sometimes, especially with health things. So one problem about health information is that a lot of people are interested in being healthy and in improving their health. So when you look at things that are about certain diets or nutrition, or if you look about things that are about physical activity, you're going to find a lot of information that may or not be true. And just like this part here, there's a lot of things that sound good. They sound like they make sense. Logically, it makes sense, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily right. And it doesn't mean that the person is necessarily like nefarious. They don't have bad intentions, ill will when they do these things, but maybe they didn't really understand and they thought they knew how heart rate works. I'm sure the teacher that I took this from really thought that, you know, they were helping and making it easy to understand. But sometimes when we do that, we take information and twist it just a little bit, and then it gets like that telephone game that it turns into a monster at the end. And this year we're really going to look at that as we're seeing in real time how misunderstandings and misinformation can cause huge issues. This one is not, okay, you can see all my searches that my AirPods are broken. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at why do people have different heart rates? And even here, there's a lot of things that can affect your heart rate looking at this source. So this is a kind of a trap. Just because it's the first thing that shows up in Google does not mean it's necessarily the best thing to use. So theconversation.com doesn't sound like a very credible source to me. It says what I want it to say. It says a lot of stuff that I want to hear, but I don't know who's telling it to me. So we're going to come down, and we have here some good choices. So I'm going to start from the bottom and go up because I'm not going to pick this one at the bottom. So ScienceDaily.com. So this is going to be science news. This one is okay. And then they're actually, if we look through, they're going to look at data worn by wearables, so like Apple Watches and things over time. So they're describing a study. That sounds pretty good. But I'm going to look at these others. Healthline.com and Health News. Again, this is going to be a published, like edited source here. This one looks okay too, but these ones here look really good. So American Heart Association is the #1 organization looking at heart disease and heart issues in the United States. Things with .org they're usually more credible than a .com. I don't want to say they're always good because anybody can get a .org, but it does mean that it's more likely to be like a nonprofit organization. And I know that American Heart Association is a credible source. They have lots of doctors working for them. And then the second one here, health.harvard.edu, also great, made by Harvard Medical School. Either of these are here. So let's start at heart.org. We're going to look at both of these. So unfortunately, this means I don't want you to use these sources, but that's okay because I'll give you some other phrases you can look at that could help. So we can see here, looking at the design of the website is not always a hint that it's a great source, or it's not Doesn't mean it's necessarily a great source. Some people are great at graphic design and not good at facts or science, but it can be like a hint. If you go to a poorly designed website, that's a hint. Maybe you shouldn't go there because it might not be relevant information. It might not be up to date. So we already know these things. I'm going to skip over this as I quickly read it. I apologize. On the video, it's going to be harder to see. You already took your pulse, so we don't need to know here. Okay, so it says here resting heart rate is usually between 60 and 100. We already saw that in the video, and it's usually like 60 to 80 or 60 to 90 in younger people. Here, they're saying our first like hint that we don't necessarily know what's going on. So if you're on certain drugs such as beta blockers, so that's a medication that a lot of people take, a lower heart rate for people who have a lot of physical activity, so as low as 40 isn't so bad. But then people who have moderate amounts of physical activity don't necessarily change from that 60 to 100. Okay, so here's other things that we want to know though. Other factors that affect heart rate that might come in useful. So things like air temperature, body position, emotions, body size, and medication use. So it's not just these beta blockers. There's lots of medications that can change your heart rate, especially things like allergy medication. So that's really common. If you have an asthma inhaler, also, I'm not going to go through every medicine that you could be on. Even things like Tylenol and things can change your heart rate because it affects your body's response to things. Emotions, like I said before, if you're very happy or very sad or stressed, that can change things. Body position, so even if you are, like if you've just stood up, it can change it a little bit. And then it should settle down, but usually even when you're standing, it's not like totally the same as when you're like laying down and asleep. And then something that's going to affect us right now, air temperature. So when it's hot or humid outside, you're going to have a higher heart rate. So this could affect it as well. So we'll talk on Friday when we're together about what effects we would think and what we'll look at when we look at our data. If our numbers are off, if our individual numbers are off from the average, we might want to think about some of these things like, was I stressed out that day? Did I sleep well the night before? Are my allergies acting up? With the smoke, our heart rates are going to be a little different than they were before. Maybe you didn't have air conditioning on at your home, or maybe you did have air conditioning on at your home, and that's going to change it. So this would be a great article to find. So if it's something like this, all you're going to do is take the URL, so you'll copy this, and you're going to put it into your heart rate lab here. So I should copy that and show you this. So copy this, and then you're just going to write a brief paragraph saying at least one thing that you learned from this and why you thought it would be relevant to your conclusion, to this study. So hopefully we're going to get some different ones. So I'm just going to go back to this Harvard one as well. Heart rate and why it matters. And the reason I clicked on it was I'm going to go back. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a lot here. Healthy people can have a fast heart rate. So this completely counteracts what was said here. That they just make the assertion that healthier, stronger athletes have lower pulse rates. And they say, well, no, maybe they don't. So because this is cited or published by a medical school, I'm going to trust this over the anonymous source who wrote this lab that we're doing. Okay, so they talk about this heart rates, a slow heart rate. So it could be that they're fit. It could be a medication, if you're on either of these medications here, which are probably beta blockers, and then sleep. And then here are things that it could be bad. So if you have high levels of potassium, if you have an infection, if you have heart disease, not great. And then again, here it's going to say healthy reasons why someone can have a fast heart rate. So exercising if you're nervous or excited, if you are using a stimulant like caffeine or cocaine. Hopefully we're talking about caffeine. So things that the whole point is to make your body work faster. This can also be like certain stimulant medications, like that asthma inhaler. If you have to take like steroids for an infection, not steroids like bodybuilder steroids, but something for if you're sick, those things can like act kind of like caffeine in your body. People who are pregnant have higher heart rates. And then here's some like poor reasons. Let's go down. I can't find the phrase that said what we were looking for. I do remember it said healthy people. Okay, so among healthy people. So we have some exceptions to the rule there. I'm going to go back and do a second search, so I'm not going to click on these sources. So the sources that come up from this search, you are welcome to use. I'd prefer that you don't use this heartassociation.org or Harvard one if you can find something different, just because we want to get as many sources as possible. If you can't, you can use this one. That's fine. So I'm going to click on this second part. So why do athletes have a lower heart rate? Okay, so these, again, I'm not going to click on this, but the fact that this is EDU, this means that this is their sports cardiology lab at this college or university. The AU just means it's in Australia. That's great. This one, this .gov, this is NIH, so the National Institute of Health. This is great too. With a lot of these things that we'll look up for, ooh, sorry, I said I wouldn't click on that, but when we're talking about body systems, we're going to look at, you'll see this site a lot, NCBI, NIH.gov is going to come up a lot. Livestrong.com, sorry, there's a motorcycle outside. Livestrong.com is kind of borderline. It's not wrong, but it's not a great source, so I'd prefer you didn't use that. Wikipedia is a no, and we'll talk about why later. Again, not that it's necessarily wrong, but you can't cite it because we'll talk about it later. So we'll go down. All of these are looking okay until this verywellfit.com. I don't know if we want to do that. This is probably for people who are trying to get in shape and not necessarily like doctors or scientists, so we're going to cross that out. We are not going to look at YouTube unless, yeah, this bite-sized biology series. We don't want that unless you look at the series and it's done by a doctor. I'm not going to look at that. And then all down here, bad, bad. So we want to look at things that are .org, and it's a reputable organization like American Heart. We want to look at .gov or .edu. Same thing with videos. If you prefer to look for videos, that's fine as well. So Dr. Vincent Sorrell, that could be a good one. Insider, maybe, depending on who they're interviewing. Sorry. St. George's University of London, that one would be fine. So the same rules apply. So I'll make sure those are written out if you look at the written directions for this. But again, your job is just to find one source that's going to expand on this simplified background that we can cite in your conclusion, that's going to explain why our hearts acted the way they did during this experiment. So that's all for today. Make sure that your data is in so we can do our class data set together on Friday and write your conclusion. And that's your assignment for the day.